Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Gananam Tva Ganapatigum Avamahe Kavim Kavinam Upamashravastamam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspata Anashrinvanuti Bisida Sadhanam. Om Mahaganadipadaye Namaha. Well, thank you. I think I'll tell you the story of the last time I was speaking from this podium. Already I'm too hot. I guess it must have been the first year, it would have been 2004, that I was at Ridgely, and it was about midnight, and the phone rang. And I was the only one there, and I answered it, and on the other end of the line, I heard, Acha Gitaprana, you will give a talk at my center on such and such a day. Clunk. And that was Swami Tathagatanandaji. And literally, that's how it went. And fortunately, I know him and knew him, and like, okay. I mean, there wasn't even a chance for me to say yes, the Maharaj, or no, Maharaj. So today, I'm not going to give a talk on Vedanta philosophy, and you could probably figure out why. That I would be a fool to say anything about Vedanta philosophy when the Swami, who is the head of this center, is one of the best speakers on Vedanta philosophy that there is. So instead, I decided to talk about what I usually talk about, and that is how to make the teachings of Vedanta yours, and how to practice them in everyday life. And I don't mean by everyday life your meditation, your puja, your japam, and the traditional spiritual practices. I mean getting up in the morning, dealing with your kids, dealing with your boss, taking a shower. I mean, how? The regular kinds of things. Because if we make too much of a serious split in between what we call our sadhana and what we call the rest of our life, we're going to be in trouble with our spiritual life pretty soon. I haven't translated either one of the peace chants for a reason. And you'll find that out what that is a little later if we get a chance. I told Diane practically nothing about my background, but I'll tell you a little bit. I come from a family that my mother's part of the family grew up as students of Swami Ashokananda in San Francisco. And I had an aunt who met Swami Ashokananda when she was 17 at UC Berkeley and basically evangelized her whole family except for her father. And so that was the only tradition of spiritual practice they ever knew, any of them, from my mother, who was the youngest, to her, who was the oldest. So I never, for a long time, like any teenager, did not want to be caught dead at any Vedanta society. Until I was in my 20s and living far from home, going to school, and I realized if I'm interested in spiritual practice, I was practically born with a silver spoon in my mouth. And why am I going and looking at all these other traditions when the door has been opened to me from my birth from a real, still living mystical tradition? So I went back. But I also have had the privilege, a little bit of a perk of a monastic life, I think, to meet wonderful teachers and practitioners of many different religions. Wonderful. For instance, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, or Father Thomas Keating from the Christian tradition. These are people that would be considered Brahmagyanis if they had that term. And I have had the privilege from learning from many of them, and I've also had the privilege of learning from the spiritual teachers from many of the Indian traditions, not just Ramakrishna Vedanta, but also I have friends who are Vaishnavas, I have friends who are Tantrikas, real Tantrikas, not hot tub Tantrikas. You know what I mean by that? That in the West, people think that the tantric tradition is synonymous with some kind of free religious sex. But the tantric tradition is actually a very esoteric tradition, a very serious tradition in India. And I also have friends who are Kashmir Shaivites, and friends who are, what would you say, random Naga Babas, random Babas and sadhus that don't belong to any particular group. So from all these people I have learned and I've known that there isn't any one right or wrong way. And the traditions, all of them, all religious traditions, all the traditions especially that came out of Asia, share a common denominator. That they will argue endlessly about the metaphysics. What about God or not God or whether, But when it comes to basic spiritual practice, just about everybody is in agreement. So the other thing I have to warn you is that the basis for almost everything that I say and do whenever I give a talk, paradoxically, is I believe that language, like Sri Ramakrishna said, is uchishta. In other words, language, concepts, and notions are the Maya. That they are actually the expression of Maya. And that, beginning with the original thought. Do you know what the original thought is? Come on, you must know. What is the first thought there ever was? I, not E-Y-E, I. And all of it comes from there. Boom! All there needs to be is one division, and boom! All thoughts, notions, and language then pop into infinite existence. So we need to use thought. We need to use language in this world where we perceive manyness. But we have to beware that we don't cling too strongly to our ideas and notions, because sometimes they can hold us back in spiritual life. There's a very senior Swami at Bellarmine, who I will not name, who last time I was there, one of the other sisters and I were talking to him. And this is a Swami who is looked at as someone of very high spiritual stature. And he said, I think that I delayed my own spiritual growth by clinging too strongly to my notions about God. And to hear him say that was really a revelation. So it calls in for all of us to think that. How are my notions about God helping me, but how are they also keeping me chained? Because if it's a notion about something, it's about a thing. And Brahman, or God, or however you want to call it, is not a thing. It's not ever an object, even though we read it as if, the Brahman this, the Brahman that. There is no division there. There is no thing called Brahman. There is no thing called God. We are that, according to the Vedanta. So that God is not out there somewhere, or didn't live back 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years. That God is right here, right now, because we are that, and we are always that. So we can use the notions, but we cannot get trapped by them. In the Vedantic terms, my favorite saying, and I know Bill is going to say, oh no, not again, is Swami Vivekananda saying that, and I believe it's in Practical Vedanta, and if it's not, it's in Work in Its Secret, where he says, it is we who have put our own hands over our own eyes and are crying, help me, it's dark. Just take your hands away. So for me, that's what spiritual practice is for, is learning how to take our hands away from what we already are. And one good spiritual practice is to remember the absurdity of this. That, because we all do this occasionally thinking, oh, how can I ever do this? That's the self thinking, oh, how can I ever do this? Is crazy. But we all do it. That we are that. We don't have to do anything. We don't have to achieve anything. We are that. So what do we have to do is lose some ideas. We have to lose some conditioning of our mind. And then if we can manage to do that, as Vedanta says, as Zen says, in a flash, the truth flashes forth. And Kashmir Shaivism has a different way of saying it. Recognition flashes forth, meaning we are that and we recognize that we have been that all along. So, so how do we live? What are some of the ways that we can, as if, make every moment of our life divine? And so they come under, I've organized them under a few categories. So the first two are go forward and dive deep. So go forward, of course, comes from Swami Pravrajika, who was one of those swamis whom everyone called a good sadhu. And if you hear a Ramakrishna order monk say he was a good sadhu or she was a good sadhu, what they're basically saying is this is a person who knew the divine. So because they're not going to say, oh, that's a God-realized person, and nor are the people going to say, me. So the kind of the code language is, oh, who are the good sadhus? And they don't only include monks, they also include other people that they know who have, they maybe are lay people, but who have reached what they feel is the goal. So, yeah, so I'm sure everyone here probably knows that depending on what our goal is in spiritual life, that Sunday religion is not enough. That we can't make too much, like I said, a divide between the times that we practice and the times that we don't. So the first Swami I ever knew, Swami Swananda, not Swahananda, was the Berkeley Swami, and he used to get up in his lectures and say, you people, you better not just be thinking about this when you come and sit down in this chair. And they loved it. So, meaning, we have to find a way, even if it seems absolutely trivial, to bring the awareness of the divine into our most mundane things. So we have to, it would be good if we knew exactly what do we want out of our spiritual life. In other words, some people, and this is perfectly legitimate, some people just come because they feel a little bit of peace, that they want some peace in their life. And others come looking for the highest ideal, saying, I want to realize the self-Brahman God. I want to see God everywhere, those kinds of things. So all of those things are great. And we also have to remember that these ideas that we have, especially when we first come, and if we've been for a while coming, and I know a lot of people here have, the reason you came in the first place is maybe not the reason that you stayed. And the reason that you had in the first 10 years of your sadhana maybe isn't the reason for after the 20th. But something that makes us say, this is what I want. So if we wish to see the divine, we need to make sure that we are living on the edge. Do you know what that means? That if our spiritual life is too comfortable, that it's become more of a kind of a routine and we've made it automatic, but if we truly, truly want to realize God, experience the divine, we need to push ourselves forward, and that means living on always the edge and not in the comfortable middle. So our spiritual life might not be that comfortable. So that's why I invoked Ganesha at the beginning of this talk. Because aside from the popular idea that Ganesha is the lord of removing of obstacles, Ganesha is the god of the edges. That's why Ganeshas in India are placed over doorways, the pathways through, that Ganesha always stands at every edge. And that also means the edge between this world and spiritual realization. So he also is the divine consciousness that Sri Ramakrishna called Vijnana. Ganesha is kind of like the anthropomorphic sort of embodiment of that. That he can, through the mythology, he can stand with infinite, and he can also stand in the divided and not lose his infinite consciousness. So that's why he's Lord of the Doorway. And that's why the kind of place we need to put our spiritual life is right up at the edge of the infinite. And it sounds kind of, but it's really not that hard to do. And when we do that, and my own teacher said this, that you have to remember that the divine Brahman, God, is never the effect of any cause. You can't ever achieve Brahman by anything. First of all, because you are that, according to Vedanta. But second of all, because all of our sadhana will not produce God. That it comes to nothing like that. Because we already are that. But what it will do is help us live right at that edge. So that what my own teacher said is what your sadhana does is puts you in the doorway. And by your own self-effort, you remain in the doorway. But it's up to the divine to open that door. You can't open that door. But your sadhana should put you at that edge. So it should not be comfortable. And if we feel like we've gotten into our comfortable ideas and our comfortable this, we need to push it forward a little bit. And each one of us will know how. There's no, we have to look deep within, and that's why the next thing is dive deep. That I'm always astonished. And if you come to Ridgely when I'm giving a class, you will know better than to ever quote a verse at me without knowing yourself what it means. Because I will say, well, what does that mean to you? And we need to take all these things that we hear and make them ours. We need to digest them. And each one of us, again, can only do that in our own way. So it's no good saying, oh, well, Sri Ramakrishna says this, and Swami Vivekananda says that, and the Bhagavad Gita says this. But we don't actually, what we're doing is parrot talk. That once, when I was in India, with my aunt, who was kind of a almost fanatic non-dualist, Advaitin. We were talking to Swami Tapasyanandaji, who was in Chennai at the time. And he was well known for someone who liked to throw the gauntlet down in front of people, you know, to spark a conversation. And so he said to them, oh, all Advaitins are alike. None of you have any of experience, and everything that you say is just like parrot talk. And this did not go over very well with my auntie. And they were very polite, but when we left the ashram, my aunt said, I've had enough, I want to go home. But it's true, what he said is true. We have to make sure that we understand in our own way. And so how do we do that? Shravana, I'm sure you've heard this. Shravana, manana, nididhyasana. Shravana, we have to hear it. And that doesn't mean we sit at a lecture and we listen and it comes in one ear and it goes out the other. That a lot of my friends say, I'm not going to remember all of this, but I will remember one important thing. And something like that, something we really have to hear it. So let's say we're someone who spent a lifetime maybe memorizing the Bhagavad Gita, and some speaker gets up and starts quoting it. We connect it with what we already know, but did we hear it? Did we actually hear it, or did we only hear enough to identify it? That apparently the brain works like this. We see and we look only enough to identify if we have identity of, say, for instance, a person. And the moment our mind identifies it, we stop looking, we stop searching. So we can't do that with what we know, what we're learning with Vedanta. That we can't say, oh yes, I know this verse, sadhana bhavatu, and let's do this one. That I'll do it. What time is it? As a kind of, to hear it, manana, to really think about it, and then nididhyasana you have to do on your own. Nididhyasana means contemplate it in any way. Sometimes people practice the contemplating part by having it in the back of their consciousness so that when something happens in their daily life, they say, oh, there it is. So I can give you I'll jump to that. We're going to do manana, but I am going to do nididhyasana first as an example of it. One of the funnest things I ever did in my monastic life was take Sri Shardamat Pravrajika Gitaprana to the aquarium in Long Beach. She wanted to go. And this is a person who has spent her entire life practicing Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasana on the teachings of Swami Vivekananda. So that they're her thinking now. That she doesn't have to think, oh, Swami Vivekananda said that. It's part of her thinking. And so I took her there, and she was like a child in a candy shop. And wandering up to the things and saying, look, there is Swami Vivekananda's example right in front of our eyes of evolution and how, she was so excited, and she's matched everything to something that she had read and thought about in her life. And sometimes they were pretty, pretty deep. You had to go pretty deep into the teachings to see how she was matching fish and what was going on there to the teachings. It was really quite amazing, and it was a perfect example of somebody who has practiced nididhyasana enough to just have it flow out of their mind when they encounter anything. So let's go back to Om Sahana Bhavatu and Manana. So we all know this, right? We'll skip Om. But the thing about this verse is it's in Vedic Sanskrit, which is almost exactly like the language they spoke in southern Iran that went into the Zen Avesta. That it's almost exactly alike, with a little bit of regional difference. And it is a little bit different from the classical Sanskrit of, say, the Bhagavad Gita or any of the later texts. In the same way, I would guess, I don't know for sure, but I would make a guess, it's different to classical Sanskrit in the same way as Chaucer's English is different to modern English. So there are words in this Upanishadic peace chant that are definitely in Vedic and have kind of been morphed a little bit differently into classical Sanskrit. And I also believe that because Sanskrit has such a huge lexicon, the words mean so many things that I believe that we have to take it into modern times. And translators have a horrible problem with this because the words mean so many things and they convey so many deep meanings by themselves. How to translate it into English or any other language? So they have to choose. How will we do this? Will we do a word for word, or will we do a kind of a feeling of the thing? So say, for instance, Swami Gambiranandaji did word for words. Swami Prabhavanandaji decided, no, I'm going to go for the feel of the thing and have Christopher Isherwood help me. So when it comes to Sahana Vavatu, that whole chant, and this is how we would do a dive deep into this. Okay, so we know the words, most of us, and we might have a sheet of paper that translates it. And we might have several different Upanishadic books that have that peace chant translated into English. And we might have a word-for-word translation. Say Swami Gambiranandaji, or many of them, have a word-for-word translation. And we might even have one that tears it apart grammatically. But I believe that to practice manana on it, we have to think, okay, what do these words mean now? And some of them are really interesting. So first of all, that Upanishad, the chant, is all in the dual case. Sanskrit has a dual case, the singular, dual, plural. So all of these phrases are may we both. And so what is that both? Teacher and student. Who is the teacher? Who is the student? We have to dive deep. So on the surface level, it is whoever is giving the teachings and whoever is receiving them. But there also is a teacher and student inside every mind and heart, the Atman and then the Jivatman. What is this both when all is one? So yes, may we both, now this root, this form that comes out as avatu, is archaic. It's definitely Vedic. And sometimes translated as come together. So to practice manana on this, if we come together, is there necessarily a chord? There doesn't have to be. But what does there have to be to come together? In other words, not just sitting there, each with their own opinions. So what does there have to be there? There has to be some respect. So the next Sahana Vavatu, Sahana Punaktu, we might translate that as enjoyment. And on the surface, that may we enjoy each other's company may be the translation. But to enjoy each other's company, what does there need to be? Respect. There has to be some respect. There has to be kind of a friendship, or a teacher and student kind of love understanding there. There has to be, we don't necessarily have to have opinions that agree. But if we're the student, we have to be open-minded. And if we're the teacher, we have to be open-minded. And if we aren't open-minded, there is no respect there. So what else do we need? We need sahaviryam. May there between us be virya. Now that, of course, is an easy one because that exact same Indo-European root came into English as virile. It means heroic or motivated is how I translate it. There has to be motivation for us to dive deep. There does not necessarily have to be agreement, but there has to be an understanding. There has to be love and respect, and there has to be a motivation and kind of a motivation. Because if everyone is just sitting there like that, saying, when is this going to be over? That isn't much motivation, is it? So there has to be motivation, or the teacher saying, okay, I'm just going to talk and the whole hour will be done pretty soon and I'll be done with this, right? That's not the thing either. That motivation means that the teacher has to love what they're doing and the student has to love what they're doing. That, yes, so tejas. What is, we have to have tejas. So on the surface, That means may there be some kind of an energy. All right, but what kind of energy? Yes, and burning energy. Tejas is that burning desire to know. And enthusiasm. Not only should there be motivation, we should have enthusiasm. Like, we're not in here just because I'm going to have to do this, especially not a place like this, say. I'm not here because I have to fulfill a requirement for some kind of educational degree. So we should have some motivation there. I mean, enthusiasm. And this, of course, is a hitch, because any of us who've been practicing spiritual life know that enthusiasm comes and goes. And that we go through long periods where we're totally not enthusiastic at all. But we keep on moving forward in whatever way. Also, spiritual life isn't all a happy dance. That everyone in this, at least in this culture, thinks that everything should be Disneyland happy. When life isn't like that. Life has its horrible ups and downs. And if we're in life, we experience them. So sometimes it's very difficult. We're in very stressful circumstances. We're fighting some kind of disease, or our parents are slowly dying and we're taking care of them. It's hard to keep our enthusiasm up. But it doesn't mean we're failing. So the last part of this diving deep of the Upanishad is the phrase ma vidvishavahai, which is very interesting, because ma here does not mean mother, by the way. It is the prohibitive, it's the negative, not. And vidvishavahai is what you call in English, or a desiderative verb. In other words, it means that's in the form that we are desiring to do the action that the verb signifies. And the verb root here is dvish, to hate, from which comes dvesha, raga dvesha. So it says, ma vidvishavahai, may we not desire to hate. So I see a lot of desiring to hate right now in the world. And somehow it seems that desiring to hate is a desirable thing. But we have to look at our mind and understand if we are at all having a pattern where we like to dislike. So often that part of the Upanishadic chant is translated as may we love each other, which would be the positive form of that. But literally it says, may we not desire to hate each other. Not even may we not hate each other. May we not desire to hate each other. Because we do have a choice, and that's where I will go next. So Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. We should not be satisfied ever with our level of understanding, whatever it is. We should never be satisfied with superficial understanding, and understand that in order to live at the very edge, it will not be comfortable, but we will move forward. And one way we live at the edge is always seeking to push our understanding deeper. And if we cut off most of our life and call it worldly, it won't work that way. It has to be in every moment. And why? Because we have to learn to embrace, erase, and replace. So a friend of mine actually calls it face, erase, and replace, but I say embrace. First of all, we need to remember that we don't need to add anything to ourselves. We are already that. We don't need to become perfect because we already are that. What we need is to delete. So we need to know what to delete. And the first thing to knowing that is to become aware that we are not the thoughts that we think, that we have a choice what we think. That most of us, we believe every silly little thing that pops into our head. And the best way to even see this is when you're trying to meditate and your mind is wandering off and we're thinking about, oh, my back hurts, and then, oh my God, did I leave the keys in the car? Oh my God, and now somebody is going to steal it, and how am I going to get it back? And those kinds of things, we can see where our mind is going, and we go with it. We don't even think, hey, I don't have to go there. Or sometimes we remember, hey, wait, I did go there, and come back when we're meditating. But things pop into our mind, and we think, I thought that. In fact, we don't even think we just think it. So the first thing is to install an app in our mind that sees the thoughts at like a, what would you say, a little bit of detachment there. That sees, oh, here I am again, thinking this again. Oh no, not again. That I do that, for me, it's the Ridgely to be done list. And I have some rules for myself. And one of them is I will not think about Ridgely before I go to my meditation. But almost, and many times I sit down there and, guess what app opens up? The to be done list. And I'm sitting there thinking, I don't have to think this. And still, there it is. So, but the first step is to install that app that kind of apprehends our thoughts. Because there is actually, we cannot control what happens to us in our life. We have no control of the circumstances we were born under. But we do control our response to it. And the way we control our response to it is understanding that there is a space between the experience and our response, where we have a choice how we're going to respond. And so a large part of this face, erase, and replace is understanding that in between something in my environment, say my boss screams at me, and whatever I respond, there's a moment where I have choice. How am I going to respond? Am I going to be devastated? I'm going to scream back, or am I going to say, no, wait, let me think, what should I, this is. So the first practice here is somehow getting that app in our mind that I am not my thoughts, and I do, no matter what the response is, have a choice how to respond. Sometimes being in a stressful, really stressful situation makes this obvious. I was in the Northridge earthquake in Los Angeles, and which was pretty big in Hollywood because the shock waves hit Hollywood pretty hard. And I had just happened to walk into the temple there. It was 4:30 in the morning. It was Martin Luther King's birthday. And it was 4:30 in the morning. And the funny thing was, I walked out of the house and it was so hot and it was so still. I thought, oh, earthquake weather. And then I forgot about that because the Hollywood ashram is in the middle of gangland. And so walking around in the middle of the night, you have to be a little careful. So I was going down to the temple. I walked into the temple. I opened the shrine up. I lit the candles, and that earthquake hit like a truck slamming into the side of the building, and I was knocked off my feet. And why I'm telling this story is because at that point, my mind went into this kind of slow-mo where I could see me reacting on several different levels. So what was happening, I was down on my knees, and everything was falling down, and part of me was so freaked out that I was like, ah! And another part of me was thinking, what should I do? What should I do? And there was a third part of me that was just watching this with total unconcern. And that is the part we need to know. We need to learn to get to that part that can clear us out of the habitual reactions. What I finally did was, I was on my hands and knees. It was shaking so badly I could not get up. And I heard things crashing all around me. And what happened is we had like a curtain valance over our shrine that fell down. And smashed the chandeliers, and when it did, I thought the roof was caving in, and that was enough to get me off my feet, and I went running. And stopped, because I grew up in California, and we are drilled from babyhood to not run outside in an earthquake. So I stood there, the door was going, and I had to put my foot in it to keep it from slamming, and watched the ground going up and down like that, with this kind of peculiar sense of being, I had reached that point of unattachment. And since then, I've heard people describe that being in car crashes also. That time kind of bifurcates like that. We want to find that moment where we are not so connected to a reaction. According to the Yoga Sutras, what happens is samskara and vasana. I know you know these words, some of you. Samskara is every time we have an experience, that creates an impression in our mind. And whether or not we remember it, because these are Asian traditions, which means those impressions will stay with a jiva, with a living being, life after life after life. And there may not be a memory of it, but the impression will still be there. So, every experience that we have, every reaction that we record, everything that we do, is as if logged on the jivatma's, what they call karma ashaya, reservoir karma. Now, there isn't going to be a reservoir anywhere with karma in it. These are all notions that we have to use in this kind of dualistic kind of talk. So what happens is first there's an I. That's the first problem. Uh-oh, I'm doing philosophy. But then that I, as long as there's an I, there's an other. And so as I experience others, I experience them always on a feeling continuum where there's extreme aversion on this side, extreme pleasure on this side, and a balance in the middle. And everything that happens to me, I experience that as well. Even if I don't have a memory of anything. Say, for instance, if I love jelly donuts, if you mention the word jelly donut, I will immediately conjure up something pleasurable. Actually, we can do an experiment. So you have to think, in this experiment, what you need to do is think of your favoriteest dessert. And not just say, oh yeah, I like jelly donuts, but actually visualize them. Try and see if you can conjure up the smell and the taste of them. In other words, make them as real in your mind as you can. And while you're doing this, the goal here is to perceive the pleasure feeling that goes with it. Can you do that? Do you get it? When you think your favorite dessert, you automatically are moving towards it. Ha ha ha. That even if you shouldn't be eating it, you're moving towards it. So that feeling of moving towards something and... Okay, so here's the opposite. You may or may not have a reaction to this, but this is the one that I use. That in your mind, you need to think. In Cambodia, after the killing fields, there was famine, as you can imagine. And so the Cambodian people had to be creative about what they could eat. And so from those times, they developed the delicacy of barbecued tarantulas. Now, when you heard that, could you feel your mind think, ah! right? That, in Southeast Asia, no problem eating bugs. But in this, in the United States, we think, oh my God, even though some of my friends have said, you eat shrimp, they're basically undersea cockroaches. That feeling of, that's aversion. So that those silly little feelings coming from those, we meet every experience with that. So what the yogis say is, we should use that consciousness, the little app that I was talking about, to try to develop, to catch that and erase the aversion or the attraction and just experience what is. And as we do that, what keeps us kind of going as a little me, thinking I'm just me and some small part of the universe, gets slowly erased. So we also, though, basically what we need to do to using this one app is to monitor all the other apps, and that's where the word vasana comes in. That a vasana from vas, indwelling, to dwell. These are our habits. And any of us who have ever tried to break a bad habit know it's not so easy. Why? Because there's a certain energy there, and it's a comfortable energy, even if the habit is very bad. So, even if the habit is destructive, it is comfortable. So it's very, very hard to break. The idea behind that, the yogis say, is as we replay experiences over and over again, those experiences become our habitual way of looking. So that we're wearing glasses. And some of us are wearing rosy-colored glasses. Some of us are wearing fear-colored glasses. Say, I grew up in a neighborhood where my father and many other people were refugees from some genocide or another. There were some Holocaust survivors, the Russian Revolution, some juntas in Greece and Colombia. And so we as children experience that. There is, if you grow up in a country where your life is threatened at every moment, a natural habit that just kind of you absorb without even noticing of expecting the worst to happen at every moment, which you then pass on to your kids. But those kinds of things, every time we replay them, become stronger and stronger. So if we have the habit of looking into the world to find things that offend me, every time we do that, we make that habit stronger. If we have an anger vasana, in other words, some anger could be justified in the right place, but if we just look at everything angrily and I'm looking for things to make me mad, that's a vasana. That's a habitual pattern that every time we do it, we just make that chain stronger on our ankle, just like Marley's ghost in the Christmas Carol, Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol, where Marley's ghost is wearing a chain of, treasure boxes? So we are wearing a chain of vasanas. And every time we act on those habits, we make that chain stronger. And every time we try to deconstruct those habits, even if we fail, we make that chain linker. We make those links weaker. So we actually can't fail. That every time, say, because it's very hard to change a habit, and before you know it, your mouth has said exactly what you don't want to say, and you think, and but the thing is, you thought that we won't catch ourselves always, but the intention must be there to watch these things, to know. And so spiritual aspirants have extra problems. Because often what we call spiritual is actually a vasana, an ego, a spiritual ego that we've built on top of our old one. That possibly because we don't like our old one, and there's some aversion there, and we want to plaster it over with a spiritual me. And the problem with that is we need to be dealing with the one underneath. And we need that one underneath. That we hear in Vedanta, yes, we need to lessen the ego, but we need that ego to become the watcher that gets us sitting in the doorway. And eventually it will, on its own, if we keep sitting in the doorway, that ego will diminish. But we need the unripe ego to become the ripe ego. If we smash our ego or pretend that we don't have whatever it was we have, we won't move forward. I've seen this many, many times where people assume a spiritual me, and they're so perfect. And in fact, in the monasteries and convents, this is common. Especially in the convents when there's always little Miss Perfect. And everybody else feels like an old horse. And here's little Miss Perfect. And usually they're so sweet and they'll do anything. And what happens is they have these horrible crashes and they disappear. Because it was a spiritual ego, and all the rest of us jerks that think, oh, I'm a failure, think, oh, well, what about this? We cannot plaster a different ego over the one that we've got. And another thing we have to be careful is, I hope no one here is trying to make themselves perfect. Because a perfect samsara is an oxymoron. That it's not about perfecting our samsara. In other words, it's not about perfecting the Maya here. It's about seeing through the illusion. So perfectionism is often a kind of aversion. That we have to be really, really careful. Perfectionism can cause a huge problem in groups. And I'll tell you, my very first Vedanta Society experience, not my first, but eventually I did go back to the Vedanta Society when I was like 23. And Swami Swananda was there. And the first day that I actually went, because I actually moved back from Washington State to Berkeley to be able to go to the Vedanta Society. And I was hoping also to transfer to UC Berkeley, but really to go to the Vedanta Society. So I walk in there my first day, and I asked Swami Swananda, what could I do? What can I do to volunteer? And he said, well, you know, Swami Vivekananda's birthday is tomorrow, and there's people making the prasad meal in the kitchen. Why don't you go and help them? That's how you could start. And so, I don't know about this center, but every Vedanta Society has their own peculiar purity rules. And almost every Vedanta Society never bothers to tell new people what they are. So, and they're not, they're not consistent from place to place either. So what is pure in one Vedanta Society is totally unacceptable in another one. And so I go there, and in Berkeley, their one kitchen, they change to make, I don't know if they still do it, they change to make the puja kitchen. And they have all these rules about who can go in there with what, and what clothes, and what shoes, and no shoes, and blah, blah, blah. They don't put any of that on the wall. In Hollywood, we used to say, no shoes, no this, no that, and still we got problems. But so I walked in there. Remember, I'm young. It's my first day at the Vedanta Society. And two longtime devotees turned around and literally started shouting at me. And one of them was saying, you stupid girl, get out of here. I mean, literally, that's what she said. And the other one came and shoved me out of the kitchen. And my reaction was, aside from shock, is like, this is spirituality? So I went home. I said, you know what? To H-E double toothpicks with this, and a lot of other choice words. And, but I started thinking, am I going to throw it all away for this one thing? So I went back the next day and I said, I wasn't there. I went to the Swami and said, I wasn't there because this is what happened. So This is the problem with rules and perfectionism in spiritual practice. That love is always the final test. And purity is a notion that will always, always, always be trounced by friendliness and love. In other words, if you call somebody down, like they did, so much for your good karma brownie points, because the unkindness that you manifest, and I'm saying this because I used to be the one in Hollywood who had to defuse these situations. It's not uncommon for the perfectionists among us to let the newcomers have it in the neck in the name of purity or spirituality. So we need to be very, very careful. Love always prevails. And that's the final, well, there's, yeah, I'm running out of time. One way that we need to judge is our own thoughts. So what do? What do we need to avoid? What are the apps that we need to install and which ones to delete from our mind? So we need to install the 4 immeasurables. What they're in the Buddhist tradition calls them the 4 immeasurables, but they come from the Yoga Sutras. The Yoga Sutras use them as well. Do you know what they are? These are the 4 things that trounce everything else. The first one is Maitri. That is an attitude of kindliness and friendship. And it really means friendship. So, Swami Tathagatananda, we were just talking about this. He would just walk up and talk to anybody. And I've seen other people do, my aunt used to do that. Within 5 minutes, she'd be the friend of any stranger. Why? Because she had this attitude that all were the self, and she had an open, interested attitude towards everyone. Loving kindness, Maitri, trumps purity every time, or any other of our vasanas. Along with that, we need karuna, compassion. We need to be aware of the suffering of others. And even if we are not always in a position to do something about it, that we can't do anything about the world situation unless that's our job or our circle of influence. And we can't really worry about that, but we can do whatever we can in our daily life. We don't want to be someone who's out saving the world and ignoring our kids. That we don't actually, especially if we're women, we have a tendency to ignore ourself taking care of others. And our spiritual life might tell us, well, that's a selfless thing to do. Well, it's not. We need to have respect for ourselves as well. So the third thing is mudita. There needs to be an attitude of joy. As Swami Vivekananda said, religion is not for the long-faced. It's not in the old days this kind of hell and damnation religion. No, thou art that. It's a joyful, yes, we make mistakes. Get up, get up, get up. And also taking joys in the successes of others. And not just ourselves. That we should be aware of others. Right now, everybody does, well, I don't know about everybody, but so many people are like this and hardly aware of anything. And, different traditions, different cultures have different experiences, and but we're not aware. If we grow up in a privileged culture, we're really not aware. So we need to be aware. We cannot live in a bubble. If we are practicing Maitri, Karuna, Mudita, and the last one is Upeksha, same-sidedness, equanimity. That's where we get a hold of our aversions and attractions. Life goes up and down, and we have to have the commitment in the hard things as well as the easy things, and not try to make everything easy because, And then there's some apps to delete. There are 6 of them, and they're called the 6 C's. It used to be the 5, and then I'll finish this and then I'll be done. The 6 C's. These are the apps to delete. Number 1, criticizing. You could probably figure this out. Criticizing doesn't do anybody any good ever, including yourself. Second of all, complaining. There is a difference between righting a wrong and complaining about it. That on one hand, we should not, if a situation is unjust, why complain about it? Do something about it. So many people have said, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. So instead of complaining about the government, about this, about that, if we can, in our own small way, do something about it. Comparing. This is really bad in spiritual life. Oh, I am not Sri Ramakrishna. There was a Hasidic Rebbe in the old days, and his name was Rabbi Zusya. And he said, when I die, God is not going to ask me why I was not Moses or Abraham. He's going to ask me, why was I not Rabbi Zusya? And so each one of us, as Sri Ramakrishna said, yatomat tatopat. For every person, there's a path. So hopeless to compare. Because you are that. Who are you comparing yourself to? There's only one. Who has deliberately become all of us, I guess you could say. In other words, not accidentally. Not accidentally Subrata, not accidentally Bill, not accidentally Rama. Deliberately, Gitaprana. So we are that, deliberately being us. What is there to complain about or compare? And we are the whole of that, not a part of that, as Swami Vivekananda said. The Advaitic teaching goes, if you see a field of pots and in the sun, and each of the pots is filled with water, and you walk up to the field and you look at the reflection of the sun, what will you see? The whole sun in every pot. Not a part of the sun in each pot. And likewise, the whole of Brahman is in every one of us. And that's the paradox, if you can say that. So competing, of course, is got all kinds of vasanas associated with it. Contending. And what we mean by that is, well, I could have done this, but Subrata did it instead. And I don't know why he did that, but blah, 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 I couldn't do it. That's contending. Or I could have meditated, but my kids just made too much noise. Or I could have, contending, hopeless. And the last one, catastrophizing. That's the one I added. That we're looking for something to go horribly wrong. If we get a scratch, we're sure that we're going to die. I can't be happy because in the next moment I think something is going to come along and wreck it. So that's catastrophizing. We need to avoid that. Those apps needed to be deleted. One app, final app. How do we choose then? How do we choose what is the right and appropriate action? In the Katha Upanishad says, here are the choices, Shreyas and Preyas. So Shri, what is beneficial? Pri, what is pleasurable? We need to measure and choose the beneficial, which may not be pleasant, by the way, but it is beneficial. Whereas Preya, Pri, will be pleasant, but in the long run, it won't be great for us. We may choose to eat the whole box of jelly donuts, but what will happen? And finally, the last way that we can make a difference in our spiritual life, we have a teacher, we're assuming. Assume that God is in front of us every moment teaching and try to listen. But we can also have other teachers. That in the Upanishads there are many stories where, say for instance, Satyakama learned from many animals the tradition, the secret to Brahman. We can learn from many people and many situations if we just keep our mind open. And also, we might find ourselves a Kalyana Mitra, that meaning a good friend that we will share our spiritual life with. In the Vedanta tradition, in the Vedanta society tradition, we're mostly taught not to share our spiritual life almost with anybody but our teacher, and who may just say, go forward. So, but if we have a friend that we feel, it could be our relative, our wife, or husband, or just a friend that we feel is on a path that syncs with ours, that we feel, that we trust, those friends can keep each other going when the time gets rough. And those friends are the ones who are not necessarily always nice to you either. It's like, hey, what do you think you're talking about? That you're playing this game again, this vasana, whatever happened to face, erase, and replace? So those friends who might say unpleasant things, but they really, really love you and they're really interested in your spiritual growth, they are invaluable. They are like gurus. So those things are some of the things. I mean, there's many, many things that can be done, but I hope I've given you some ideas about how to tackle our daily perception and how to stick ourself into that, how to spiritualize it. That I hate this expression worldly. And I understand it's a value judgment that we need to make. This is what I need to avoid. But the problem is there is nothing worldly, that it's all divine. And even the most difficult, awful things are also divine. And if we say, worldly, we've created a terrible division in our mind between Brahman and Brahman, because that also is the self, you know? All these kind of things that go on, also the self. You know, you wonder, a missile crisis in Hawaii? I don't know if you heard about this, where they accidentally hit the button that said that there was a missile coming in, and everybody was panicked. That even that is the self. What my aunt used to say, the madcap Atman. So thank you very much. Is there a closing chant or? Yes. All right. We'll hope you come and visit Ridgely sometime. I know most of you have. That I almost feel like this is an audience that moves, or I'm moving, and that it's either there or here. Questions and answers? I don't know. Are we doing questions and answers? Yes. You've got time for maybe one or two. Okay, here? Yes. Yeah. All right, so I'll do the closing chant, and then we'll do questions and answers, so people can leave if they don't want to. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat.